Mark here for another great Wisdom and Knowledge 5 podcast, and I bring on self-sabotage coach Jehan Sattaur in Barbados. And Jehan, we're going to discuss, multiple topics today, but I want to start out by saying if somebody wants to work on their emotional health, what are the steps? What would they do to improve their emotional health?
That's kind of a trick question
Hmm.
because we always hear the term mental health thrown around.
Yeah.
It's essentially emotional health. And the problem with people is that they don't want to hear when you tell them that um human beings are naturally self-regulating. And if you can't self-regulate, then there's a reason why you're doing it. You're trying to keep yourself stuck in place. So I guess, you introduced me as a self-sabotage coach, but what people don't understand is that that's all secondary to my actual profession as a therapist and
Okay.
hypnotist, right?
Hmm.
So I work with real difficult cases a lot of the time. A lot of it is like rape, domestic abuse. Um, I've even had human trafficking. I've had a bunch of people that I'm pretty sure that what they were describing is some kind of satanic ritual abuse, some kind of mind control, brainwashing in their families, all kinds of stuff like that. So that's how I know all the stuff that I've talked about on the show before. So essentially, emotional health is really the same no matter what it is, no matter what your life circumstance is. It's about first step taking personal responsibility and the willingness to want to ask yourself difficult questions and knowing that when you have a emotion, a tough emotion that comes up that you don't want to deal with, or like in a situation, like sometimes when I'm just doing hypnosis sessions and stuff, clients will hit a wall and they'll have a traumatic memory that interrupts the whole process of what they're trying to work on. And so um, you have to stop doing what you're doing and you have to tackle that because you never know what's going to come up. I jokingly say that you never know. One of these days, I'm going to get somebody that's like they got a government cap or something. They've been brainwashed, but it's kind of like that when you're dealing with complex trauma and things like that. All these different things will come up to try to block any progress that you have because under the surface, those are the real things. So you have to be willing to deal with all that stuff and you have to be willing to put yourself out there and be completely vulnerable and change everything because life changes really quickly when you actually sit and do the work. So anytime you see somebody and they appear to be not going anywhere, it's because
Hmm.
they're avoiding emotional stuff like life coaches and stuff. I mean, for the most part, life coaching is a big scam because a lot of those guys are just people on the internet that got like $25 certificates or maybe they paid a couple $1,000s to the ICF or something, but they weren't actually formally trained in questioning um any questioning frameworks is the best way to put it.
Okay.
And even some therapists aren't really trained in questioning frameworks. You kind of have to do your own research once you get your papers, so to speak,
Hmm.
because that's really all they are. It's just a bunch of paper um to say that you read a bunch of stuff.
Hmm.
But um like you have to be in order to be successful as either a helper or a person in the chair being helped, you have to be willing to ask a lot of questions about yourself that you don't want to hear the answer to.
Hmm.
I hope that answers the question.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And how would somebody feel better about themselves or show, self-worth, self-love to themselves? I know you can do things like reading books, like and not like New York Times bestsellers or indoctrination books, but there's powerful books out there that can change your mind, change your thinking, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, those books will only get you so far,
Hmm.
but the problem with the internet and the self-help industry and even the psychotherapy industry is that it's cultish and it's coming from the same people that want to keep us disempowered. So, as I've
Hmm.
told you before, it's the cult of global disempowerment, and they do everything in their power to leave out all the good stuff. So, if somebody's writing a self-help book, they're probably going to be told at one point, depending on their publisher, you can't say that because we're not allowed to say that because it's not on the internet yet. And whatever Tavistock wants us to put in there, that's what we got to stick to the
Hmm.
rules, right? And I know that sounds ridiculous to a lot of people because they don't want to believe it, but that's actually the truth. So when you hear all this mumbo jumbo coming down from these people, it's regulated. That's why like there's stuff that you and I've talked about on podcasts already, and it's only now coming out on the internet because if I've talked about it before, it wasn't allowed to be on there. But then all of a sudden, you
Exactly.
see a
Now
bunch
it
of
is.
people popping up and they've got like a million followers or something. They're talking about it, and
Mm-hmm.
you're like, well, why? Why can one person say it and one other can't? So, like you mentioned, self love and those kinds of things. You can't learn self love because self love doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
There's
Okay.
only core values,
Mm-hmm.
right? And if your core values don't include integrity and compassion and empathy, then you're pretty much screwed. Like you're never gonna like yourself enough to like anybody else. You're never going to be able to give someone something that you don't first have, and you have to kind of have that ingrained in you and embedded in you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's not something you can fake, and so most of the self-help stuff is just trying to get you to fake that stuff. You
Mm-hmm.
know, pretend to be compassionate, pretend to understand. Oh, that person chopped their willy off because they feel like a woman. Oh, let's be compassionate about that. But
Mm-hmm.
like in a big issue like that, people just don't understand what they don't understand with that kind of stuff. They don't
Yeah.
understand the spectrum of emotions and all the all the real hard decisions that a person has to make to
Mm-hmm.
be like that and then continue to live in a fallacy for the rest of their lives, like a reality distortion field,
Mm-hmm.
basically. Um, and there's mostly trauma underneath that nobody has any idea how to undo that trauma. Nobody's been able to figure out, like nobody's ever from the beginning of time has ever been able to figure out what to do with that level of trauma. It's just too hard because of what I said before in the first question. It's down to personal responsibility for the person to do a certain amount of work. So, yeah, what was the question?
No, you pretty much summed it up well. And what about the same powers that be are in control of things like the food supply? How does what you put into your body, affect not only how you look, but your mind and everything? Because they're doing everything they can to destroy our food supply.
Yeah, so whenever I get asked that question, I pretty much have to go directly to the limbic system.
Hmm.
Old school psychiatry pretty much used a model that said that everything was based on the limbic system and how it's triggered. So that's where we get fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response. And it's never really going to be anything other than that because it's all about staying safe. So remember, like I've said 100 times on the show, the subconscious mind is only concerned with what makes it feel safe, even if it's bad
Hmm.
and causes a lot of problems for you, right?
Yeah.
So it's just trying to copy stuff that commonly happens and you just kind of learn things like you earn the right to be a particular way by repetitively thinking or doing something.
Hmm.
And um even though I guess I said it that way to say this point that you're not really entitled to anything. Like life is nothing but change. And so we don't know as a species how to control our limbic system well enough because we've evolved to just not get eaten, you know? So in a hostile environment, that's pretty much all that's happening. Your limbic system's going, oh fuck, all day long. Because if you really think about it, you go back to that old story that they always tell you, like if you're getting chased by a lion or a tiger or whatever it is, or dinosaur if you believe that shit, then as soon as you step outside to take a piss or get a berry off the tree, your limbic system was designed to know that something was wrong
Hmm.
before it even happened. Like you could tell there was something in the bushes waiting to get you, right? So could you imagine like all the stimulus and stuff that we have and all the crap that we put in there? And there's people that sit around in labs just trying to make stuff that mess up these three main pathways that we have that basically send and receive information that information then gets put into some kind of emotion and it's usually negative because that's what the limbic system and the subconscious mind are really focused on. What's negative that we can get away from, right? So, um, you know, like I said, you have these guys that sit around in labs and they're basically targeting the reward pathway, and that's basically just this system of things that's neurons essentially, and they're sending and receiving information, and they take that neurotransmitter information and they just kind of translate it. So neurotransmitters control everything that you do. So you have these neurons that basically they're constantly trying to synthesize dopamine, which is basically just a chemical that's used for communication. So it's using that communication neurotransmitter to send another set of neurons somewhere in your midbrain. And I think that's the ventral tegmental area. And then when that happens, those neurons start to fire and then they communicate. And so they send more dopamine to your nucleus accumbens, which is just that thing that gives you that feeling of motivation. And um, you get that sense of reward. So behind every behavior is a reward. So because the nucleus accumbens is basically responsible for learning, that's how you learn that, watching stuff on YouTube and you feel like you just learned something really big. That's what makes you feel smart after that. Or, you read a book or something and that's what makes you feel accomplished and like you learned something and you just upgraded your consciousness somehow. It's just neurotransmitters, it's just chemical and neurons.
Mm-hmm.
So that's also the same system that's learning how alcohol feels good, how porn and masturbation or just like going on a shopping spree feels good. It's what tells you that Oreos make you feel good, all that stuff, right? So when those neurons are going off like that, they start to release these opioid peptides, and it's basically just morphine and heroin endogenously. So that's where you get feelings of pleasure from. So that's how addiction pretty much comes up for people. And it's not even necessarily full blown addiction. That's the reason why you can't stop eating Doritos or things that taste really good, but they're not good for you. So if you put stuff in your body and your limbic system is getting hacked, then you're pretty much screwed and it's going to affect your mental health because you're in survival mode. So you're making really bad choices all the time. And it's hard to get out of that cycle, even for people that maybe somebody has an egg allergy, but they grew up hearing in the community, eat eggs because protein, 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 got to get your protein. And nobody's actually ever died from not having enough protein, but because you have these industries that want to sell you products, they just make this shit up and they're like, oh, you're going to die if you don't have more than 30 grams of protein a day or something ridiculous.
Yeah.
And, if you want to have muscles, you got to have like 1.5 grams of protein per pound of body fat or something, or you're never going to build muscle. All these things because they just want to sell you stuff that's
Mm-hmm.
bad for you. So if you're putting all these chemicals in your body, MSG, um, what's the other one? Um,
High fructose corn syrup. Yeah.
yeah, like seed
Seed
oils.
oils, exactly.
Um, even some people can't eat meat. And so back to the point with the eggs, like, eggs, depending on where you get your eggs from, like if you don't know the ass that the egg came from, you're screwed because you don't know what that animal has been fed.
Mm-hmm.
And then those eggs go on to feed bad bacteria in your gut, and the bad bacteria agitates your limbic system. And so, because your baseline for not feeling well is garbage, and you just continue to live your life not knowing that you actually feel like garbage and you think that that's normal, then you're in your limbic system, right? So
Yeah.
you got to have lots of different things. And I'm not against eating meat or anything like that, but I don't even really know why people think the carnivore diet works,
Mm-hmm.
other than anytime you change your diet radically and go on an elimination diet. So logically, if you were eating a whole bunch of stuff and then one day you decide you're just going to eat a bunch of meat all the time, then yeah, you're going to lose weight or you're going to build muscle or you're going to feel a lot clearer for a time because it's just killing off a bunch of bacteria in your gut. And then you're going to swap out one set of bacteria for the other. But
Mm-hmm.
then eventually that'll come to bite you in the ass because your body doesn't know what to do with that. So anytime any of your organs are under stress, then what do you think happens? You end up in your limbic system, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
it's all just this feedback loop. and your body's saying to the mind, something's not right here, your brain's going off. So you end up just releasing a lot of stress hormones and stuff, and you're not making the right choices. And that's pretty much the point of the internet at this point. It's to mislead you, make you eat a bunch of crap that you don't need, make you upset about some political opinion or some plane that crashed or some other garbage. And that's where we're at with the whole thing.
Hmm. What about something like parasites? What's the best way to get rid of them, to rid yourself of them in your body?
Well, first of all, I don't think anybody will ever really be free of parasites.
Good
There's this
point.
really toxic notion on the internet that all parasites are bad. But then you look at what we're actually made of, and it's a bunch of bacteria, right? So it's about
Yeah.
eating the right foods that kill the bad bacteria, point blank. And for some person that is on the carnivore diet, they're screaming at this podcast right now because they're saying I'm wrong because their internet guru told them that I'm wrong. But before all this, you pretty much just had to eat anything you could find, right? Whether it was a piece of rabbit or a berry off of a tree. And humans are omnivores for a reason, for that very reason, for survival purposes. But um, you when you eat a good balance of things and your diet is full of vegetables and fruit along with whatever else you like to eat, then you're going to be a whole lot better when it comes to parasites than anybody else. If you eat lots of pepper, parasites can't stand that shit. That's why
Hmm.
farmers give red pepper and cayenne pepper and things like that to their chickens to kill the parasites and stuff. Peppers can't handle, like, peppers is just like eradicate stuff like that.
Hmm.
Seeds from fruits kill parasites, pumpkin seeds, all that kind of stuff. Um, for a long time, people have just been eating that stuff as snacks. But if you go on a diet where it's regimented and they say you can't eat certain things, then you're putting yourself at a disadvantage because there's no such thing as a fat person that eats fruit, and there's no such thing as a sick person that eats fruit. Like, you're not going to get diabetes from eating fruit. There's a lot of fruit fear that's pushed on people and stuff like that. But all that stuff is things that we are symbiotic with. Like, they belong in our environment because throughout the ages, that's what we've had, basically.
Hmm.
And then you see stuff like animal husbandry. I forget the year that that came into being, but from then, those that hide in the shadows, that have always hidden in the shadows, have tried to control what we eat. And so they're like, oh, you got to eat chickens and cows.
Hmm.
When, you know, we seem to do a whole lot better eating a lot more gamey meat, like deer and things like that, elk, things like that. You look at what the meat eating Native Americans ate, indigenous tribes and stuff, and it wasn't chicken or beef. Fish has always been in our consciousness, and it's always been in our bodies because we learned to eat that from the time we figured out that we could survive just by hunting stuff, right? So
Yeah.
people just aren't very smart because the internet tells them what to do. And as long as the idiot box is telling you what to do, then you're probably doing the wrong thing, is my point. So
Okay.
parasites just survive on crap. As long as you eat crap and you put a lot of meat in your body and stuff that doesn't digest quickly and easily, then you're gonna feed parasites.
Hmm. Yeah. What about something like skin conditions? Does it what you eat play a major factor? Let's say something like eating too much breads or grains or whatever. And is there some uh breads like sourdough or organic sourdough or something that's better than other things that you can put in your body?
I hear a lot of crap about that on the internet too. And I just think
Hmm.
that depends on your genetics, honestly.
Okay.
Because if you are from a region and genetic wise where there's a lot of pasta and a lot of grains and stuff eaten, then you're probably not going to have a breakout. But like, I'll be the first to tell you, like, I've been trying to detox for a while and I've been getting these breakouts on my face. And this
Yeah.
kind of stuff is usually just like streptococcus and stuff like that in your gut, right?
Okay.
So that's what acne really is. And so once you start to kill that stuff, then it's going to secrete out your skin because it's the fastest way to get it out. So every once in a while, you should just check your diet and make sure that you go on some kind of a detox because my genetics, I got a lot of Indian, I got French white guy to be specific, things like that. So I can eat a whole lot of different combinations of things like bread and grains and oatmeal and things like that, and I'll be fine. But then there's other people that might not, you know? There's other people in my family that have similar genetics and they can't, but it's all about bacteria, like I said.
Mm-hmm.
So it's best for each person to figure out, go on a journey because you're going to eat garbage at some point anyway and not probably not know it. It's impossible to trace every source of everything. But the way that me and my partner mostly eat is we eat a lot of fruit and vegetables, and it's really plain, bland stuff. I'm talking about boiled potatoes, celery plain, boil some beets, squash, sweet potatoes, whatever, a little
Mm-hmm.
salt and pepper, lots of cayenne pepper on everything, cucumbers, tomatoes, real simple stuff, because that's pretty much how our species has survived, just plain stuff
Mm-hmm.
and no crap added to it. There's lots of fruit. That's mostly where we get our raw stuff from, like some raw vegetables and things like that. I don't eat any beef and I don't eat any chicken because I know that those two things, parasites love that.
Okay.
And
Good to know.
uh, also, I noticed that once I stopped eating those things, my health instantly improved.
Ah,
So
okay.
I would not be surprised if there's an agenda to make us eat those things to create sickness on purpose, basically.
Mm-hmm. That's a very valid point. Now, what about things like music? You know music very well. Are you totally like against people listening to music, or do you think some type of music can is beneficial for you, or cut all of it out? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would never ask anybody to live the way that I do. I just really couldn't give a
Sure.
fuck about music, to be honest. I was a musician for X amount of years,
Hmm.
and I just realized that it's a toxic substance. It's another drug. And again, because you're dominated by neurotransmitters, that's all you're doing. You're trying to get something for a reason that is probably undefined to you. So you're basically what you're doing when you listen to music is you're trying to get energy or you're trying to get an emotion that you can't generate on your own. And that's problematic. So just because I don't listen to any music anymore, it doesn't mean that everybody should just stop listening to music. That's just a personal choice because I realized that the way that everything is set up is designed to attack you on a cellular level and an emotional level. And I just
Hmm.
don't want that in my consciousness anymore because I'm trying to get all the way up there. If somebody wants to dance around and pretend that they're gonna squeeze their asshole together and listen to music and shake their ass and manifest $1 million, and I hope that works out for you, but it doesn't actually work for anybody else. If you're the one person, call me and let me know how
There
it
you go.
goes.
Good point.
But it's all that stuff is perpetuated by the new age, and there's all these different offshoots. Like we keep coming back around to this point all the time. There's all these different offshoots of the same cult that try to use things like music to control you. Music has always been a control mechanism. I mean, I've gone through this so many times on um other podcasts about how emotions are essentially just electrons communicating at a vibrational frequency, right?
Oh yeah.
So that's what music is. Music is actual emotions in the form of sound, and somebody's put a structure to it, and it's influencing you all the time at a cellular level. So anytime you're listening to music, basically just being exposed to it and you're not even paying attention, it's affecting you on a cellular level. It's either speeding up or slowing down your heart rate without you being aware of it, or it's relaxing your nervous system, or it's agitating it. And so, in all the studies that have been done on music, what they found is they just keep coming back to the same type of music over and over again, which is classical music. It's the only thing that doesn't fuck up your brain on brain scans, right?
Yeah,
So,
I've heard that.
if you are just exposed to something, let's say you got one of my favorite bands was Alice in Chains. Let's say you got like the Dirt album is playing in the background and you feel great at the time, But what's that actually doing to your nervous system? What's that doing to your blood pressure, your digestion, how you're breathing? It's messing up your limbic system, even though you're getting these neurotransmitters that say, oh, this is great. Eventually, after a while, you get tired of that song, and that's because that pattern of neurotransmitters doesn't work for you anymore, right? It's not because the song stopped being a good song, right? Does that make sense?
That makes perfect
So,
sense.
yeah, so I've said this a billion times, like music is just having a straight shot, bullets to the head effect kind of it just I guess it's just trying to say a lot of stuff really quickly. But like the
Hmm.
culture of the world in general is dictated by music. Music has always just been a form of enslavement. It shapes the way civilization believes things, how civilization
Hmm.
behaves, whether people are complacent and complicit to their own enslavement and destruction. All that's coming through music. Um, Obviously, I talk about the TV and stuff a lot too, but that's irrelevant when you're talking about 100 years ago, right? Because that wasn't around. You just
No.
had music. And so it was that the Chinese believed that all music was basically just an energetic formula and it was just like free energy. And so basically what they were saying is that music has the power to violate your free will. And they basically said that you should never ever use music for entertainment because as it is, it really doesn't take a whole lot to stimulate the dark side of a human being, which is so true, right?
Hmm.
Like you never know when you're gonna do something that you might even think is out of character, right? So they basically knew that when music became a form of entertainment versus spiritual development, that it would lead to immorality and just messed up stuff.
Hmm.
So, um, I guess your question was like, should you just stop listening to music? I mean, if you get you still get your rocks off of your favorite songs and stuff every once in a while, I'm sure that's okay. But we've evolved to a point now where like Confucius would just be shitting his pants
Hmm.
because he basically said that um most music was just lewd, repetitious, harsh, and annoying after some time, and um he basically thought that good music could be used as a tool to positively shape the character of people, but not very much of it actually exists. So that was the problem. Um, and I think that that's really evidence of how like classical music really is the best kind. But the problem with people is that problem, like, I guess I'm trying to say so much stuff so quickly because there's like a lot of stuff that I could say about this. But essentially, what I want to say is that Confucius was right because when it comes to classical music, when people say it's boring and it's not interesting, it's because they're looking for that emotional hit, if that makes sense. So before you consume something, ask yourself the question, am I just trying to bury an emotion or am I trying to generate an emotion that I feel like I can't on my own? And why is that? Because that's
Hmm.
a sign that something else is going on under the surface. Confucius pretty much said that if you want to know whether a kingdom is well governed and if its morals are good or bad, the quality of the music will tell you. So if you look at everything and how people really look towards Western music as though it's the holy grail of all things that are good, that's how we've been brainwashed. I forget the name of the book, but it's something about the Marxist minstrels or something like that, the subversion of populations using music. That's probably not the right title, but I read it a long time ago when I was trying to figure this stuff out for myself. And it just proves that the whole 12 tone um, musical scale that we have is basically about mind control. And each tone is assigned to a specific month. And it's allegedly, I guess they claim, I don't know if it's true or not, but they claim that each tone, whatever month it's assigned to, it gets stronger during that particular month and it will resonate more during that month and it will affect you even more during that month. And the Chinese basically separated everything into yin tones and yang tones, like they do with everything else.
Mhm.
Um, and what they thought about it was that every tone was basically an undertone of these celestial supernatural tones. So they were coming from whatever the music of the spheres, if you want to call it that. Um, and they felt like, and man, this is really tough to explain in just like layman's terms, especially for those that don't play an instrument. So they believed that every note and every month that corresponded to it had its own tonic. So a tonic is just a scale. And they basically had these different forms of ceremonial music that would be performed under that particular month and nothing more than that. Because then it would be bad if you played the wrong thing on the wrong month. And I guess they were all about using music for healing. And so if music was in harmony with what they thought they were hearing in the stars and stuff like that, then life was good for everybody. But then if the scale of the music was not harmonious, then it would make people really sick and it would cause a lot of tension and disharmony within people, and like everything, like the crops wouldn't grow right, all kinds of crazy stuff is what they believed. I feel like I need to take a deep breath after that. So I think the same thing is just happening right now because you have all these studies and stuff that are done on how music affects plants. And again, it's the same phenomenon as with humans. Certain types of music are bad and some types of music are better. But then you could get into the whole 432 hertz thing, which is not true at all, actually.
Okay.
And um, basically, the reason why instruments were put in 440 hertz is so that everybody could tune to E standard on all the instruments and have it be the same thing.
Mm.
Because in 432 hertz, the intervals, which an interval is a space between a note. So if you look at the notes of a keyboard, you have those white keys, you have the black keys. Then obviously each one is a different note. And so there's a space between that. There's a leap. So between A and B, there's A sharp, is what I'm saying. So if you look at the notes in 432 hertz, even if you tuned your guitar to 432 hertz, you would still hit notes that you would hit if you were tuned to 440 at some point, whether it's on a keyboard or a guitar or whatever. And when you're singing, then that's even more likely because the voice isn't meant to be naturally on pitch either. So all that is just malarkey that somebody came up with to scare the living daylights out of people and be like, don't listen to music, listen to anything in 432. Or the new agers love that shit too, where they're like, oh, 528 hertz, it's the frequency of love. It's, all that stuff is just made up garbage. I actually had a list somewhere around here. I'm not sure if I have it on this computer, but if you're familiar with like Rife, Royal Rife, you ever heard of that guy?
I have, yeah.
If I have it. If I don't, then I apologize. Um, here it is. So on this list is like 94 pages. If anybody actually wants this list, I can send it to you. Just have to email me at selfsabotageinfo@proton.me and I'll send it to you. But if you look at the frequency 13 to 30 hertz, you can generate surprise in somebody, or you can generate shame, guilt. You can give them herpes at 126 hertz. You can do all these different things with these different frequencies. So I have another one right here that I use for this, the piano frequency. So if you take a random piano frequency, let's say, let's find the one that's closest to 528. So C5 is 523.25. That's the frequency. So 523.25, let's look at that frequency list and see what it says. So 500 hertz, that's when you start seeing things like abscesses, anthrax, the bubonic plague. diabetes, diverticulitis, influenza, leprosy, fucking leprosy, guy. Like all that shit is in that frequency
Hmm.
range. You can either stimulate it or cure it, depending on how you do this kind of stuff. So, you see all these people out there and, they got like smallpox or hepatitis or staph infections or Parkinson's or something. And you wonder, geez, what has the role in music actually played in any of this? And you can't control frequencies because you're going to cycle through frequencies anyways. If you're cycling through the notes on a keyboard and you start at the lowest key, which would be 27.5, which would be A, and you go all the way up, you're going from there to 30, 32, 36, 41, 43, 48, 55, and all the way up to about 4,186, which would be the highest on an 88 key keyboard, I think. So, what are those frequencies doing to you? And if you tune to 432 hertz, you can't escape either. You're doing the same thing. Like you might end up on 612 hertz, give you fucking leukemia or something, right?
Sure.
6,121 is AIDS, right? So,
Yeah.
you fuck around and like the high end of a guitar in a rock song is gonna be anywhere between 6,000 to 8,000 hertz. So let's say for one reason, just because it sounds good in the mix, you have to boost 6117, 6,117 hertz. Well, you might give somebody hemorrhoids, right? It sounds funny, but that's the way it is. So when you come down to like mixing music and stuff like that, you are always manipulating those frequencies based on what actually sounds good within the context of how it was recorded. So anything you listen to could just have random frequencies added in because it sounds good, or it could have those frequencies cut because it sounds good.
Hmm.
So to get into an argument about 432 hertz is ridiculous. When you listen to um, some Steve Miller songs, they're tuned to 432 hertz just because they like the way it
Okay.
sounded, you
Hmm.
know, like all those songs, Abracadabra, Joker and the Thief,
Yep.
um, stuff like that. Um, it doesn't change how it sounds when you put it in a playlist with other music either, right?
Mm. Okay.
So
Yeah.
all the stuff that people are talking about, they're not musicians. They don't know what the hell they're talking about.
Okay. Yeah. And another song that comes to my mind is "Riding the Storm Out" by REO Speedwagon because the live version, the popular version, starts out with tornado warning, tornado siren. It's got to be something.
That's a good point. I mean, all those sounds and stuff are doing stuff to your limbic system and your cells too.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, that's my point. Like music is affecting you at a cellular level, usually not in a positive way. And so, if you're a college student or something, you need to block out a bunch of noise in your head, then classical music is your best bet. You might feel better listening to Metallica, but I can guarantee you it's not the best thing
No,
to
I've
be
heard that.
doing.
I know Baroque classical music is really good for studying. That's what
Mhm.
I've heard.
Yeah.
Hmm. But they also use music, because I remember this in grade school. They'll use music to promote things as good, like war, because I remember it was fourth grade and they put on the intercom this stupid Bette Midler song From a Distance because the Iraq war had gone on. And they said right on the intercom, you are tuned into Wood Radio. And they said right on, the DJ said, right on there on the intercom that every single school across America was listening to this song in honor of, the Gulf War and Iraq and what's going on. Like you
Mhm.
cannot make this up. And we were all like, we're in fourth grade. We're all like, this is junk. Why do we have to listen to this song? And we weren't under that mind control or that war was good, but that's what they were trying to
Mhm.
do.
Yeah, and a good portion of the population is actually extremely susceptible to it. Back to ancient China, they perfected that form of mind control, and I think it was done like 2,000 years after the birth of supposedly Christ, to program people with whatever their version of the truth would be. and to control people's character.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm trying to remember the guy's name. Emperor Shun or somebody like that
Okay.
basically knew how parts of his kingdom were performing based on the kind of music being produced. So he knew that there was a direct correlation between people's health and disease based on the music that was being produced. And anything that was too harsh or sexual was basically an indication of a sick society.
Mm-hmm.
So you think about um what people like Plato said. I think it was in his book The Republic, where he said that when modes of music change, the fundamental laws of the state also changes.
Mm.
So what is a mode? Mode is just code for mood, right? So
Mm-hmm.
um even if like a song is, let's say you have these different modes, I'm not going to go through all of them, but say Ionian, which is like the major scale, and that changes to Aeolian, which would be basically the minor scale. You go from so-called happy in theory in sound to more sad and low key, then you're changing someone's emotional state. So if you look at the songs that are on the Billboard Top 100, and you were a genius enough to go through and see what key those songs were in, what modes or mood was used to create those songs, you'd be like, okay, well, the majority of this stuff is pretty unhealthy, and it's like an emotional roller coaster, really going through all these different things. But you would see how, um, in society, and you look at that by contrast, and you're like, okay, yeah, I could see why even these compositions reflect what is going on in the culture. So I'm trying to remember the name of that book. I really want to get the name of this book because I want people to read it.
Okay.
I know it's going to come to me. It's The Marxist Minstrels,
Okay.
a handbook on communist subversion of music. That's what it
Okay.
is. So that's talking about Lenin and stuff like that. And he
Yeah.
basically said point blank, the fastest way to destroy a society is through music,
Okay.
right?
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's people that, like, back to the frequencies thing. There's people that have died from being in front of loudspeakers. They just were
Mm-hmm.
fine 1 minute, then go home and keel over. I can't remember the bass player of what band this was, but I remember this happened about 12 to 15 years ago. He was just
Okay.
in front of the stage speakers. He was in front of his bass cabinet, and it gave him a heart attack.
Oh, I know who yeah, it's off the
Um,
tip of my tongue. Yeah.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said before, the research is all there that tells you that plants either grow or they die in
Mm-hmm.
the presence of certain types of music. So they flourish in the presence of classical music, and they'll start to die in the presence of pop or
Mm-hmm.
rock or heavy metal music.
Yeah.
Um, there was another musicologist some time ago. I think this must have been in the 80s. Shit, what's his name? Dr. Adam Caniste. And he basically was saying that they studied the side effects of different types of music on different people, and it actually poisons people
Mm-hmm.
and it makes them sick. And they have no idea, like, people will actually have no idea why they don't feel well. And that happens to a lot of people too when they go to a concert or something.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the next day or next few days they come down with a cold or a flu or something. It's because their cells have been agitated, and now, their ability to self-correct has been disrupted. And so you
Mm-hmm.
start to feel sick, and your immune system suffers and stuff like that. So, I mean, they've even said that if you crank the gain high enough on a certain amount, I guess, I'm not sure if it's a certain amount of amplitude or if it has to be a certain number of speakers all in one place.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the theory is that if you put an egg in front of one of those really big speakers that you have at a concert and you crank it, you can eventually boil that egg,
Oh,
right?
wow. Yeah, I think I've heard that before.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the
Yeah.
same thing could go if you're at a sporting event because you hear a lot of the large crowd. You also get music every 5 seconds or 5 minutes or whatever.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, David Crosby, didn't he just recently die or something?
I
Um,
wanted to ask you about David Crosby. I've heard things, there's a lot out there about him, especially with like satanic lyrics and such.
yeah, David Crosby, they say was a Satanist. I believe that's coming down the pipeline from
Hmm.
John Todd, who alleges to have been a Satanist and turned Christian or something like that. But I really have to be truthful and say that I don't buy that story. I don't buy his
Okay.
story at
Hmm.
all. He might be telling the truth, like he might know what he's talking about.
Sure.
Um, but as we know now, is as it's coming out, a lot of that stuff is just basically about ritual abuse and satanic stuff. And I guess Aleister Crowley always gets a really bad rap as if he's the only Satanist that has ever existed, which doesn't make any sense.
No, not one
It's
bit.
a very old religion and it's been happening for time in memoriam. There's always
Hmm.
been the idea of the light versus the dark, and dark's always been present with the same type of thing. Um, but it was David Crosby that actually told the Rolling Stone magazine once that he knows that he controls people's values through music, and that his
Okay.
goal was to basically steal these kids away from their parents.
Ah.
So,
Hmm.
yeah.
That makes perfect sense.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So, obviously with the music, you're glad that you got out of that. And one other thing about music is think about where do you go to get your music? Well, yeah, you go and you listen to it in your car, but you go out to a bar or something. Look at how down, people are in bars. You got the alcohol, you got the music playing,
Mm-hmm.
you got all these different factors. Whereas people like you and I, there's better things that we could be doing than, doing that. Uh, I don't know if you want to call it depressing or whatever, uh, thing it is that transpires when you do those actions and go to those places.
There's so much stuff that's better to do than going to a bar.
Hmm.
It's not even funny, but it's just like going to a bar and stuff is something that it's ideas that get implanted in you, cultural conditioning. If you look at UK culture, they believe that, you go down to the pub, you hang out with your friends, you're chilling with your mates. There's nothing wrong with that. Or you got a problem, head down to the pub, you talk to the bartender, you slam some Guinness or a pint of something, whatever you like, and that'll solve all your problems. But there's so much other stuff you could be doing instead of drinking. You One of the suckiest things about being a musician was going to perform at a bar because most of those people are just going to yell play Freebird anyway, first of all.
Oh yeah.
And
Okay.
secondly, people love the familiar. So as a musician, you have to know all the crowd pleasers, or nobody's going to listen to what you're doing.
Good point.
Um, that's why original music tends to suffer in the industry because people just want to hear the stuff that they know and love already, and that's what they want to get drunk to. Because
Hmm.
people who are drinking are emotionally unstable. Drinking alcohol for any reason, people can be like, "Oh, well, I just like a glass of wine with my dinner." You're full of shit. Like a glass of wine because you got problems that you want to bury. It's
Hmm.
it's not because the cheese tastes better. Um,
No.
so drinking alcohol for any reason is just a manifestation of poor emotional health. And so there's something under the surface that um, needs to be dealt with. It took me a long time to figure that out. And it takes a long time for a lot of other therapists and stuff to figure that out because it's not talked about in the literature when you're studying. They don't say, hey, alcohol is bad for you outright, but they will treat addicts and they never ever take a look at themselves and be like, oh, yeah, maybe this scotch that I'm drinking or this glass of wine that I'm having is affecting me.
Hmm.
And that's Jesus. I did a podcast about the cult of psychotherapy that covers all that stuff for anybody that wants to listen to it. I am the host of the Boundless Authenticity Podcast.
Okay.
And there's an episode, I think it's called A Short Story on the Cult of Psychotherapy. And
Yeah,
I
you
go
can
into
send it to me.
how,
I'll put it in the link in the description.
yeah, I go into the link between psychotherapy and eugenics and mind control and the psychiatry industry and all that stuff and how it's all just linked together. It's the same people that have come together throughout the ages and through a particular time period. And I link in like how Freemasonry basically gets a bad rap, but they're the ones that have the money to
Mm,
sponsor this stuff. So that's mainly a lot of their involvement in things. And people can really understand how all this stuff came together with like Hegel and all these people, B.F. Skinner, all these people were just playing along with the agenda. Um, how this thing comes down from that Nazi Germany, all that stuff. So when it comes down to what we know about psychology, it's all dictated by these people.
mhm.
So all there is to be known about psychology is all that has ever been known, and there will never be any more than that. So if you look at stuff like, first of all, how the fuck did we get on this topic? But I'm gonna keep going. If you look at
Okay.
stuff like what happened in the 1970s, where they decided to take being gay out of the diagnostic statistical manual because a bunch of psychiatrists were like, wait a minute, if we're gay, that we can't have poor mental health because we're psychiatrists. That doesn't make
Mm,
sense. Like, yeah, you can be gay and pretty much do just about anything in case anybody didn't tell you that.
mhm,
So like they kept a big stink about that, and that's why it was removed.
mhm,
And um everybody knows that the transgender thing, all the information about how transgender is stuff to do with your brain and all that. Any research that concludes that has been paid for by a particular group
mhm,
of people that want to put that out there and make that factual so that they can continue to give people incorrect diagnoses. And like I said, it's our response to trauma. All that stuff is responses to trauma and a sick environment is. And like, I'm not hating on anybody like that at all because I totally understand. I have to understand those things more deeply than I would actually like in order to help people.
mhm,
So, um, it's a mess. And the majority of the industry is geared towards either gaslighting those people or coddling them. So, what do? You end up with a bunch of people that aren't sure about life, and life is fucked up enough as it is. And so, there's no real way to provide them with the comfort and guidance that they need to try to make the best of it and have a happy life. Right. So, it's kind of like when a person tells a lie, they have to really believe it enough to tell that lie. And so the industry is kind of catered around that model, whether it's transgenderism, homosexuality, bipolar, anxiety, depression. It's all about you have to believe the lie first and believe there's nothing you can do about it. And, you're always going to have a certain set of circumstances that are attached to these things. And that's all there is. And
mhm,
that's all like Tavistock and the guys that I talk about in that episode of the cult of psychotherapy and stuff like that. It's crazy stuff. Like all this stuff is just made up crap. Nobody actually knows what's going on.
mhm.
And
Oh yeah.
I guess the point I'm trying to make is that everybody's a human being and everybody's got the same wiring, no matter who says what. And it's always going to be the same truisms, I should say, the same truth for everybody.
Mhm.
Whatever is true for me is going to be true for Mark, and it's going to be true
Exactly.
for you that is listening to this podcast. It doesn't deviate from that.
No,
Uh,
not one bit.
yeah.
And now, do you believe in like you know, putting what you put out comes back to you, like manifesting things, or if you're thinking your thoughts attract what you want, and if you know, do that often enough, you're gonna get these results. It's gonna come in, what you want, or are you someone who thinks that that's BS?
You know what makes me laugh is
Okay.
the clip that's on the internet with the so-called neuroscientist that says that if you hold a particular thought in mind for more than 17 seconds, then it's going to happen. I'm still
Yeah.
waiting on my mansion and my $1 million.
Yeah. I feel that.
But they've got all this stuff that they come up with to try to explain away that stuff when it doesn't work. The reality of the situation is that you will have a certain number of thoughts or beliefs under the surface. You will put yourself inside of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So you will think, act, believe, and have emotions that cause you to do things that put you in particular positions with things. That's why some stuff might come to you and other stuff might not, because you have to do stuff. Doesn't matter what
Exactly.
you want, you have to do stuff. You're
Oh
not going to
yeah.
squeeze your asshole together and $1 million is going to drop in your lap. You're
No.
not going to get like, everybody's not me and is going to be like broke one day and then somebody dies and then suddenly you out of nowhere you get a check for $40,000.
Hmm.
That's happened to me.
Yeah.
Um, but I didn't go, oh shit, I just manifested that. I didn't do that.
But were you
You
thinking
sure?
about that at all or no? It just came.
I wanted more money, but it just happened. Somebody just died.
Okay.
Somebody
No.
didn't know about, and just, hey,
Hmm.
here's some money from a family member that was like, hey, take this.
Hmm.
Um, but I haven't been able to repeat that formula. So whatever it is it I did, I don't know what it is. Just
Hmm.
being honest. But all that stuff is just made up. There's no such thing as manifesting your dream life. What is going on with that is insidious because they're taking advantage of people who are in survival mode and telling them that you can do a little bit and get a lot. So they're
Sure.
playing on people's inherent need to take shortcuts to get a particular outcome.
Hmm.
Life is not like that. Life has never been like that. And again, the new age narrative is a lot of that's dictated by the same global group of farts that are just fucking tell
Exactly.
you lies all the time. Um,
Yeah.
if you have like Neville Goddard, for example, who's always talking about visualizing stuff and things like that, he was born in Barbados. When he was young, the older folks around here, they were much more open, um, in terms of, I guess, their consciousness was more evolved and things like that. Because again, there was no garbage in the food, or very little garbage in the food. Everybody had to eat clean sources of food.
Sure.
So their consciousness was like way out there. There was no TV. If they wanted music, they would sit around and play their instruments or whatever. They would talk amongst themselves. They were more spiritually evolved. And so they told him, you know, you seem to be very gifted. One day you're going to do good things. And he just kind of took that idea and ran with it in the wrong direction and started saying all this stuff about visualizing and affirming things and stuff like that. But it's kind of like trying to tell your parents what to do. You can't do that. Like our generation, we tried to tell our parents what to do. You get your ass beat. So why are you trying to make demands on the
Hmm.
universe? There's these natural laws that everything kind of adheres to. And um you just really can't go against them, basically. So you have people like Rhonda Byrne, you fast forward to that time period that is just piggybacking off the same narrative.
Hmm.
If you want to really evolve your consciousness and you want to break free from the system of enslavement for long enough to put two plus two together and not end up at five, then you have to be subtractive in your approach. You have to be looking at what are the things that drain you and take your energy, who are the people and the places that take your energy, what foods do I put in my body that basically deteriorate my consciousness and my limbic system and my cells, because all that stuff puts a cap on how smart you are, how well you're able to it's hard to describe. It's like having a bullshit-o-meter. And it
Okay.
just kind of like that needle just kind of moves whenever you hear something, because truth resonates at a particular frequency that your entire biology can tap into, and you just know that, yeah, that's a narrative.
Hmm.
But there's a lot of people out there, and it drives my fucking ass crazy, because on the Boundless Authenticity podcast, you see a lot of people that come on there and they talk this new agey type stuff. And I know it's a narrative, but I can't just out of respect for the person dive in and be like, fuck you, you're talking shit. Um, because then I would have absolutely no guest whatsoever on any
No, I
topic.
know what you mean.
It would have the entire podcast series would have to be a series of monologues, which would be incredibly time consuming.
Oh yeah.
And I would just sound like an idiot on a soapbox, because the level of consciousness on this planet is so low and people are so gullible
Hmm.
that even if I said what I had to say, no one would believe me, right?
Yeah.
And no one would be able to comprehend the kinds of things. And I'm not saying that because there's probably some idiot screaming at this podcast saying, oh, you just think you're better than everybody else. I don't. I am
No.
absolutely 0% better than anybody whatsoever. I have just taken the time to work on myself, to work on my diet, to
Hmm.
work on my mindset, to not be afraid to ask myself difficult questions, to learn to accept people for the way that they are and the things that they say and the things that they do. And even when they chop their willies off and I know that it's wrong, I don't try to tell them that they're wrong for it. I just move on and stop trying to control everything and everyone else except for what I put in my body and what I put in my mind.
Hmm.
It's as simple as that. And because I have learned to ask myself so many questions in so many different ways about everything that goes through my head, it's hard for bullshit to slip past me and be like, oh, you know what? There's a virus floating through the air that's going to be 6 feet away from me. But if I just go eat a burger at a restaurant, it won't bother me because it knows I'm hungry.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's across town slapping grandma across her tits and making her sick, and it's going to kill her because she didn't wear a mask and because I didn't get an injection. Right. So
Exactly.
there's people that just really are that dumb that you think that that makes sense. So it's the same thing that goes with the new age narratives. And you notice it's the same repetitive content over and over again. And there's always the same explanations. And if you try to tell those people anything about that that makes sense, if you question it, they get really nasty really quickly and they show their true colors, right?
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
yeah, that's just the way it is with anything, whether it's about healthcare, spirituality, Christianity. You tell people something that you really want to know, like you genuinely want to know the answer to this question. How does this thing interlock with this thing that you just said? And they're like, they freak out,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of that goes along with the manifesting culture, and it's because we live in a narcissistic society. What do you
Hmm.
expect? It should be obvious, but it's not. If your parents are terrible parents, then guess what? You're gonna end up like, right?
Hmm.
You're gonna be damaged goods. So if the people that are supposed to be in charge are stupid, stupid duty heads, then what do
Hmm.
you think the majority of people on the planet are going to be like? They're going to be stupid.
Yeah. Good point.
Yeah.
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 What a great conversation, you know. So all over the place, but many important topics.
Yeah. I feel like I just dumped a whole bunch of stuff as quickly as I could.
No, sometimes these are the best, episodes, you know?
Yeah. But seriously, I mean, having said all that stuff, I challenge anybody to just go get that book by Dr. John Coleman, the
Hmm.
Tavistock Institute for Human
Okay.
Relations. And it will tell you all about how mind control has been done for time immemorial, how they've perfected the art, and how everything in society that we see is linked to that. Everything that we listen to, all the music is dictated by the CIA or Tavistock. All the ideas that we believe, including ideas on spirituality, are dictated by Tavistock and the CIA because it's run by what's called an invisible college, which is just a really fancy way of saying anonymous people who have money
Mm-hmm.
that basically say, okay, well, if we're going to stay in power, what do we have to make these people believe? That's all there is to it.
Mm-hmm.
And that sounds really simplistic. And a lot of people are going to want to resist it because the way that I've said that is so simplistic, but that's all there is. That's all there's ever been. There's no need to get involved in conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories are great, but it's just brain candy. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of it is essentially just disseminated by the same people in this invisible college because they want you to try to figure stuff out. But everything on the internet and everything that's ever been written has always been just a controlled operation, even if the person's the smartest person on the planet. But these people just control all the information and
Mm-hmm.
they want you to think everything that they say is true. And they want you to think that you're thinking for yourself when you read a David Icke book or whatever the case is, or whether it's Jordan Maxwell. I put a lot of Jordan Maxwell stuff on the podcast as well because certain things, like I know I'm not hating on Ike either, but
Mm-hmm.
if you read those things and you're smart enough and you've developed your pattern recognition because you've worked on yourself, you will eventually arrive at different conclusions than what they've said in
Sure.
those books. But it's going to get you there. It's going to be a platform to get you there. But whether you get there or not is dependent on you. I hope that this is sinking in with people.
No, it should by now, most
Yeah.
definitely. Hmm.
Mhm.
Well, if
Yeah.
someone wants to reach out to you, where would how would they contact you?
Um, like I said before, you can email me at selfsabotageinfo@proton.me. I'm also on Instagram at Jehan Sattaur. So I'll spell that JehanSattaur. I have a private group for the Boundless Authenticity Podcast on Facebook. There's a community of like 1,000+ people there, so you can join by doing that. Just send your request and I'll approve you. Um, what else? Boundless Authenticity Podcast is on Spreaker, Spotify, Apple, Rumble, and sometimes YouTube. But YouTube does not like me at all.
Uh-huh.
So
Okay.
I wouldn't even bother looking there.
Yeah.
Uh, Everything's on Spreaker. And
Okay.
Spreaker is probably the easiest unless you want to watch the videos. It's not really necessary unless of course you hear someone they're talking about something and maybe they're sharing something on
Sharing a
their
video or
screen.
something. Hmm.
But apart from that, Spreaker is the best because you don't even have to sign up. You can just go on Spreaker and start listening to podcasts immediately. And it usually, if you do sign up, it lets you know when the next episode is out, so you don't
Okay.
miss an episode. Yeah. So
Hmm.
that's the best thing about it. That's why I don't really promote Spotify or Apple as much. But if that's what you listen to podcasts on, go for it all day
Okay.
and leave me a rating, preferably 5 stars if you like it. If not, don't even bother. Don't be a hater.
Hmm.
Just leave me alone.
For sure.
Yeah, I think that's about it.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Jahan. It was such a great episode. Uh, I learned so much, and I'm sure that all of my listeners did too. You're a world of knowledge out there.
All right, and thanks for doing this. This is what, the third time?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Okay.
For sure.